to you.
Would you mind if I stand here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bring it to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And
How are you all? Oh, there you go. Hi guys. Oh, sorry, did I mess up your filming?
That's right, I'll fix it. We're good.
I snapped my ACL in my leg. I broke my knee and I snapped my ACL ligament, and my orthopaedic surgeon told me that the ACL injury is most commonly seen in elite athletes. So that's probably the only time I'm ever going to be in that category. So I'll take it. But thank you. Do you want me to start now?
yeah, or and then we'll do the presentation. How about that?
Okay. My name is Leah Potter. I was born here at the end of the street, and I learned very early how you can become homeless through no fault of your own, really. My father was defence and he was a Vietnam veteran, and when I was about 13 he went completely insane. We were posted to Melbourne that year, and it became so bad at home that I ended up running away from home at the age of 13. And over the next few years I learned very acutely things that a politician can't learn sitting in an air-conditioned office. I learned, every night was a challenge to find somewhere safe to sleep, especially for a young girl. I was sexually assaulted repeatedly. It was really difficult to find food, and it was really difficult to find somewhere safe to live. And none of that was my fault, Eventually I ended up getting into youth refuges and such. I ended up finishing school and going to university. I found myself back in Melbourne years later. I came back to Darwin after studying journalism, and the NT News wouldn't give me a job, so I felt like a complete failure. I went back to Victoria, and I found myself a neighbour of Professor Marcia Langdon, the Indigenous academic, and while I was there she helped me research a book. 8 years it took me to write this book. I researched the invasion of Southwest Victoria and the Indigenous resistance during the squatter era. In the 1800s in Southwest Victoria, what happened was they just divided up all the land, and you could have it for free if you could fence it and if you could prove that someone was living on it permanently. So Southwest Victoria had an influx of people just grabbing land for free, fencing it off, and what they then did was proceed to remove the vermin from the land, and that was tens of thousands of the Gunditjmara, who were the people that lived through that area. I was going to say owned that land, but they didn't feel like that. They felt like they were part of the land. They were very special. The Gunditjmara were one of the few Indigenous tribes that weren't as nomadic as many others. They built villages and they built amazing eel traps that were absolutely engineering masterpieces. And then along came the squatters, and within just a few years, the Gunditjmara numbers were reduced to only 600 remaining surviving people in the area. Now, this is where my book comes into play. My book's about the very first refuge that was built in Australia, and it was built by a man called Johann Cromnau. He was a religious refugee from Prussia. He came over from Europe after the Reformation of churches, and he had been arrested and almost burnt at the stake. This is what they were doing to people that preached a different doctrine back then. And so he fled to Australia, and at that point he got one of these 600-acre blocks in Southwest Victoria. And rather than removing the Indigenous people from his 600-acre block, what he did was he set up the very first commune in Australia. He took in the last remaining few hundred Gunditjmara, and this wasn't ideal, because what would have been ideal was if they could have their own hunting grounds back. But instead what he did was he gave them 3 acres of that land. He gave them a milking cow, and he lent them his bullock and plough, and he gave them their first sack of seed. and he taught them how to farm. Now those people would have been wiped out completely if that one act of kindness, if that one man hadn't come along and given them somewhere to survive. Now I left Victoria after a very bad, violent marriage breakdown, and I came back to Darwin directly after researching that book. I came back to my hometown and I saw such a dreadful issue with homelessness, which had gotten worse while I was away for those 10 years. And after researching that book, after researching how difficult it was for Indigenous Australians to even survive the first 100 years, and then to come back to Darwin and see such a neglect, and we have the worst homelessness rate in Australia. 13,000 homeless people in the Northern Territory right now. It's 13 times the Australian average for homelessness, and something like 95% of all the homeless in the Northern Territory are Indigenous. So I've come back to Darwin with all this, what's the word, like, I want to say sympathy, but that's a little bit condescending, but empathy maybe for the plight of Indigenous Australians. And I came back from a domestic violence situation, found myself homeless again. So homeless at 50 years old, and this is the homeless, middle-aged women is the fastest growing demographic of homeless people in Australia for so many reasons, and I found that myself. Divorce, lack of skills after raising children and things like that. When you come to be this age, it's difficult to reach out for people when you're homeless. So I arrived in Darwin, homeless again. I was just sleeping in my car down at the beach. And I thought, well, what can I do? And so I went down to Woolworths and I just bought 50 hot dogs and 50 hot dog rolls. No butter, nothing else, just those 50 hot dogs. And I heated them up in a microwave. I was in a motel this night. I had somewhere to stay that night. And I went out on the street and I gave out these 50 hot dogs with my 2 kids. And I live streamed it to Facebook to my friends in Melbourne, and I was like, you know, this is a really bad situation on the streets of Darwin. That was 2018. All my friends who saw that live stream that night, they inboxed me and said, can we help? You know, will you do it again tomorrow night? So the next night, I got $50 from one of my friends, and I went and bought another 50 hot dogs. And since that day, I did it every single night. The first year, it was just me and my kids. We just went out giving out hot dogs every night, and it was called Hot Dogs Without Humiliation, just for various reasons. And what happened was people started to hang out with me. In the second year, people started bringing food and hanging out with me, and I thought, well, why don't we set something up a little bit more permanent? So we ended up getting a spot down at Doctor's Gully, and every night we were bringing hot food, soup, that people just kept coming. It was amazing. People are very kind when you scratch the surface. Anyway, so over the years, they have continued to do that. It's now a massive thing on Sundays. The volunteers have taken over that, especially with my mobility issues. I'm not able to do the Sunday hot kitchen, but hundreds of volunteers do it. And we feed about 250 people every week. Out on the street, I still go out on the street every night, and I know all the permanent sleepers in the city, and this helps. Especially at the moment when we've got so much unrest and crime. And the thing with politicians is they seem to say the words that encourage people to believe that homelessness equals crime. Particularly the member for Fanny Bay, who recently pushed the Darwin City Council to issue more fines to homeless people. So what they were doing, the rangers were going around and waking people up and fining them $160 for the heinous crime of sleeping in the dirt on Larrakia land, which I found quite ironic. And so I went up against those politicians and I fought those politicians, and we ended up agreeing on a moratorium where the council will not be issuing fines anymore. But the danger with the member for Fanny Bay was that in the media he was speaking these things such as, oh, I'm just trying to clean up crime by issuing fines to sleeping people. And when he said those things, what happens is in the public's mind is they think, oh yeah, homeless equals crime. Now you'll find that sometimes homeless people do commit crimes, but you'll find that the most heinous crimes that have been, you know, the mass shooting, etc. More recently, the stabbing of Declan Lavity, things like that. None of those were homeless people, okay? I'm not saying there's no crime amongst the homeless, but what I'm saying is that it's very dangerous when politicians encourage the public to believe that homeless people are all criminals. And this, as I was saying before, people are kind inside, but what they do is they excuse themselves to look away, because in their mind they think, oh, they deserve it, they're criminals, or, you know, they're all on Centrelink, which they're not. About 50% of the permanent homeless in the city here are on no benefits at all for lots of reasons. Fleeing domestic violence, hiding from traffic fines, language difficulties, mental health problems, things like that, lots of reasons. Many of the homeless are on zero income. So I have to battle not only what I see, I live in Austin Lane, so I'm here in the city. I have to battle not only what I see and how I feel about that, but I also have to try to battle public perception all the time. And it doesn't help when politicians sort of equate homelessness with crime. Anyway, getting to the point. So we're out on the street every night. We've got Auntie's Free Feed in Palmerston. They feed hundreds of people every week. We've got the girls that do the Esplanade every Sunday. They feed hundreds of people every week. And I'm out on the streets each night with blankets and food. And I've been lobbying for political help for the last 6 years, you know, because all we do is feed homeless people at the very bottom of the ladder, and all the issues that drive homelessness, the lack of shelter and the lack of housing, mental health, drug abuse, alcoholism, all those driving forces that lead people to end up homeless. And then of course in my own situation it was just family violence and a marriage breakup. But what I do is I lobby the politicians to try to fix those things, and in the meantime we're out on the street. And what I've found lately with the rise in crime and with the extra security patrols that we're putting on, and even some of them have dogs, what I'm finding is that homeless people in the city are actually not very safe. And I've been lobbying, and I'm going to present to the Darwin City Council next week a set of recommended homeless protocols. Every capital city in Australia has a set of written homeless protocols except Darwin. So that's what I was going to ask you to help me to back me up as I call on all the politicians. If we have a set of basic homeless protocols that are based on dignity and respect, that all of us could refer to, the soup kitchen, the security on the street, police, night patrol, anyone that's interacting with homeless people could refer to those protocols, and that's my next step. We can feed them, and every week we're feeding more. We've given out 100,000 meals with no government assistance, and we can continue to feed them, but that's not changing the situation, and that's not making them safer. What I believe would be the first step to help make them safer is a set of written homeless protocols for everybody to refer to, and they are based on dignity and respect, and I'd really love some help with that. And thank you for the food too. It's just an endless thing, and just people get hungry every day, and I'm really grateful that you guys helped us out. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening to that very long story. I really appreciate that you're giving me the time to tell it.
Thank you, Lee. We've got also $1,000 from our op shop to give you. And so there are 2 $500 vouchers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for your story. And obviously we're going to take this off here. This is our collection, which we did during Lent. So all the food that was collected, thank you everyone who donated to that. and obviously the op shop every year disperses a fair amount of money, over $30,000 to a variety of causes, and yours was one of them this year.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Let's give her a
guys.
round of applause.